You're on mute, David.
It takes a few seconds to pop on, so now we're live.
The regular meeting of the Uptown Special Service District Advisory Board will now begin. Good morning, my name is Mike McLaughlin, and I will be facilitating this meeting of the Uptown Special Service District Advisory Board. Before we begin, I would like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. I will now call this meeting to order and call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum. So when I say your name, if you can just indicate that you are present. Mike Finn.
Present.
Nicholas Hall.
Present.
Jeff Herman.
Present.
Jackie Knight.
Present.
Bob Sorensen. Dan Treble.
Present.
Nick Walton. Very good. And I will note that we are joined by Hennepin Avenue Project leadership, including Becca Hughes, Jonette Kunow, and Alan Klugman from Public Works. We do have two very quick housekeeping items. One, because there is a quorum present, there is the adoption of the agenda, and if desired by the board, we can also adopt the minutes from the December 15th meeting. If someone would like to make a motion to adopt the agenda and approve the minutes of the December 15th meeting. Motion?
I motion. Nicholas.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second by Jackie.
Jackie, thank you. Very good. On the motion to adopt the agenda and approve the December 2020 minutes, I will call the roll. So when I say your name, if you can just please respond yay or nay if you approve those two items. Mike Finn.
I approve.
Nicholas Hall.
I approve.
Jeff Herman.
I approve.
Jackie Knight.
I approve.
Dan Treble.
I approve.
And I will note that Bob Sorensen and Nick Walton are absent. That motion to approve those items carries and are approved as distributed. With that, our next item is the public comment period that we have on all of our agendas. I will note that we have not been joined by any members of the public, so we can table that motion until later in the agenda should someone from the public join us and would like to address the board. With that, we can move on to our main discussion item, which is the Hennepin Avenue reconstruction project. And at this point, I will turn it over to Becca Hughes and Jonette Kunow. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks again for having us this morning. As you mentioned at the top, Michael, Jonette Kunow from Kimberly Horn is here, as well as Alan Klugman, and we are all part of the project team for the Hennepin Avenue project. So similar to yesterday, this will be a repeat we were at the Lowry Special Service District yesterday. This is the same presentation. So we'll just run through this. This is about a 10-minute presentation, and then we're happy to address questions and take questions following it. So thanks again, and I'll kick it off. So we just did an introduction, so no need to do that. But today we just wanted to share a brief project update, kind of talk through some schedule adjustments that have been made that we did share at the public open houses in early March. Just remind you of the two design options that the city had unveiled as part of the draft concepts for public comment until last Friday. And then Jonette will conclude with just a quick synopsis of the public engagement, some of the numbers, some of the categories, just sort of a quick look at what we've received so far through the public engagement process, which was about a month and a half long. So in terms of project updates, if you did listen or participate in any of the open house meetings or have watched any of that material since early March, we had 2 meetings in early March. And in response to feedback we'd heard, not just from Councilmember Goodman, but from other stakeholders in the community, there was definitely concern about a proposed construction start date for the project. Initially, we had thought that utility construction, or initially we proposed that utility construction would need to begin in 2022, and then the full street reconstruction would begin in 2023. We were able to work with our funding partners, specifically our federal aid funding partners, to discuss making some adjustments in the schedule, and we were able to make adjustments at the back end, moving utility construction a full year into 2023 and perhaps a bit more into 2024, and then also street reconstruction from 2023 until 2024. So we've got about a year adjustment on the back end. If you look up, however, under the 2021 column, you'll see that there's a little orange star that is in the month of August. That is still our current schedule in terms of when we anticipate bringing a preferred layout forward to City Council for approval. I do think it's important to caveat that certainly one of the items that we've heard a lot about during the public comment period is the desire to adjust that timeline. And so that is something that we are evaluating now, and we will report back. Right now, we're still staying consistent with City Council approval and layout approval occurring in August. So we just want to flag that, but know that there are discussions about that potentially being pushed back if we can find some flex in the schedule. In terms of the options that we currently have out, I'm sure that all of you have had an opportunity to take a look at the two options that were put out as draft concepts for public comment. Just kind of, reminding you that really the basis of this, and I know that we talked about this at past meetings, is that, it's really based on the policy guidance. So the foundation for both option 1 and option 2 are the policy guidance that we have adopted by the city. Some of it is more recent, like the Transportation Action Plan, the Street Design Guide. We also have Complete Streets, Vision Zero, Climate Action Plan. So all of these policies sort of converge and really formed the foundation or the basis for the two options that we released publicly, as well as the technical work that we've done for the corridor as well. Again, to remind you, there's two main design options, and really our intent here was to lay them out on the full corridor so that individuals could really provide more meaningful comments in terms of being able to look at how it lays out on a full corridor, to understand the constraints and the feedback, and the constraints and the limitations that exist along the corridor and how that translates based on the option. So this was the first option that we had shown. There's a cut section here that basically shows how this laid out along the corridor, but this was the option, again, with the bikeway, just kind of to orient yourselves to these layouts. First, you'll see that there's a two-way bike facility, a separated bike facility on the east side of the street. There are 8-foot sidewalks on both the east and the west side of the street. 2 dedicated transit lanes that are outlined in the red color on both the east and west sides of the street. 2 through lanes in both the north and south direction that are separated by a median space. You can also see the BRT platforms that are in the orange color on both sides of the street, and then you can also see the pockets of off-street parking and loading that exist with both options in sort of those blue checked areas. Also, just to illustrate that the areas that appear to be mostly green, they're actually a green and brown check. Those areas are shown in the boulevard areas as well as the median areas, and those are areas in which we would anticipate incorporating green infrastructure, so sustainable stormwater features, grass, trees, plantings, things of that nature. Those are things that we would hope to include as part of the layouts with each of these options.
So I'll talk briefly about option 2. The main difference between this option and the option that Becca just showed, option 1, is that this option does not have a bicycle facility on Hennepin Avenue. So if this option were chosen, the city would make improvements on another nearby north-south facility to provide that bicycle connection, and then also with improved connections between that facility and Hennepin Avenue. So without the bicycle facility on this option, you can see there's significantly more space between the curb and the building. And so when you lay that out on the corridor, you can see there's a lot more of this green and brown check space. That is space that, as Becca mentioned, can be used for greening. It can be used for sustainable stormwater, sidewalk cafes, parking and loading. So there is more of the parking and loading spaces in this option compared to option 1. We just wrapped up 6 weeks of engagement. And we had 2 live meetings on March 2nd and March 4th. We had about 230 people that attended those live meetings. And the summary of questions and responses are posted on the project website from the live meeting. During that engagement period of 6 weeks, we asked for people's feedback on the 2 design options via a couple of formats. One was a comment form that was posted on or linked to the website. There was a map where people could look and place comments on the individual options, and then through the project email. So through Monday of this week, we received 2,975 comments during that 6-week period. And I would note that about 1,000 of those came in the last week. This is a very large response for any city project. That's a huge number of comments received. So this chart is just showing the ways that those comments came into us. It will still take us some time, obviously, to be processing these. Because we are still in a pandemic and we aren't able to do face-to-face engagement or face-to-face meetings, we did have extra efforts to get the word out about the project and make sure people knew about it and that we were requesting feedback. So one of the questions that we asked on the comment form was how people heard about the project and the virtual engagement. And so these were the responses about how people heard about it, with social media and email notices, both from the city and other organizations, being the largest 2 contributors. And then finally, on the feedback map, each of the comment pins has a category indicating the element that the comment is about. And so this is just a early breakdown of the nature of the comments that were received. I would note that within a given category, that comment could have been positive or negative. So for example, in the bicycle category that you see is 25%, that comment could have been supporting a bicycle facility on Hennepin or not supporting a bicycle facility on Hennepin. They get grouped into that bicycle category. So one of the next things we need to do is then do that further breakdown to understand what how those comments fell out. And with that, that's the end of our quick presentation. And mostly we just wanted to answer questions from this group or hear your comments.
Who would like to ask the first question?
Well,
This
I
is
guess I
Bob
will.
Sorensen. I just wanted to let you know I'm joining the meeting.
Oh, is that you, Bob?
Yes, I couldn't get on Microsoft meetings, so.
Okay. Very good.
I
Thank
called
you,
in.
Bob. Glad you could join us.
I guess this is Nicholas Hall, and I guess I'll start with a question. I guess the concern that I'm getting back from a lot of people that I've talked to in regards to this, and this is both business owners and residents of the neighborhood, is access to Uptown and access to parking for businesses and properties around Hennepin Avenue. The biggest concern I'm hearing is they don't want the rest of Hennepin to turn out like between 31st and Lake Street on Hennepin, and what has gone on with that project and how it's affected the local businesses that surround that area. That affects everybody else. So I guess that's what I've been getting the feedback from enormously on the 2 plans, that they don't really service what our community needs.
I'll just offer a comment or maybe just a quick response. We've definitely heard that throughout engagement. I think, what we've tried to do through this process is be transparent about the fact that Hennepin is going to look different. It's not going to be the same as what's currently out there now. Have we gotten it just right? There's definitely strong feelings that we haven't in either of the options. So we've definitely heard a lot about parking and loading specifically on street throughout the corridor, and the desire for more of that to be provided for businesses. And what I can assure you is that, we will be going back and looking at that more thoroughly on a block by block basis. The first attempt here was to target and provide parking and loading throughout the corridor in areas where we've seen demands or heard from businesses through the business survey that we conducted earlier this year that there was the need for it. So we'll continue to do that through this process, but thank you for your comments, and it definitely, we've heard this common theme specifically from businesses and from residents as part of this engagement process.
This is Dan Treble. Just to kind of follow up on that thought. So what is you've got the two options here. What is the rest of the process? I mean, are there arguments to be made that, hey, it sounded like from your last comments that there are arguments to be made that, hey, let's shift the drop off of the parking area down and from one area to the other, if I understood that correctly. And so I guess from now until this gets finalized, what's the process for making an argument of where we want the parking or where we should try to have the drop off zones and that sort of thing?
Yeah, in terms of process, maybe I'll start, and Jonah and Alan, feel free to chime in. I mean, the process really right now is that you can see we received a lot of comments. I think we've read all of the emails that have come in, but there are a lot of other comments that we need to evaluate through this process. 3,000 comments is a lot of comments to receive on any project, and so we really need to dive into those. I would just say as sort of a general comment, and I'm sure you can understand and appreciate this, is that we knew this project was going to be a challenge when we started it, and it's really, finding a balance that works for users is definitely a challenge given the constraints on the corridor and the desire for this to accommodate all modes. And so it's definitely going to be ongoing discussions about, what sort of adjustments we can make in response to the public comments that we've received. I do also want to acknowledge that, for all the comments that we get about businesses and parking, there's the exact opposite comment about it in some cases, and every comment in between. And so we're really, we really have quite a task in front of us as we move forward and as we recommend adjustments to whatever preferred concept moves forward. As Jeanette articulated as part of, the second option, we have more flexibility than we do with the first, just given the fact and the reality of space constraints. We can't make more space on the corridor beyond what we have. And really, we'll take these comments, we'll make some recommendations about adjustments that need to be made. We've had a lot of conversations with specific businesses that have reached out to us. We know the businesses that have off-street parking, right, that have surface parking lots or ramps that accompany their use. And we're also aware of the small businesses along the corridor that don't have parking. And so we will continue to work on those and evaluate them on a block by block basis to include more parking, again, just with the acknowledgement that there's more ability to accommodate more parking in one option than the other. And that's just the reality of the space that we have to work with.
And I would maybe just add in terms of process. So of those 3,000 comments, some of them are very specific to say, I'm on this block and we need spaces for Uber and Lyft or pickup and drop off or whatever. And then some comments just say, there isn't enough parking. So now is the time in the process where we are really looking for, if there are specific needs that haven't been communicated, now is the time to understand what those needs are, so that as we're both identifying a preferred option and refining that option at the same time, that we can get somewhere that is balancing those sometimes divergent opinions that we're hearing.
Good. Thank you.
Jeff.
This again is Nick.
Sorry, Jeff had his hand up, Nick. So let's go with Jeff, and then we'll come back to you, Nicholas. Jeff, go ahead.
All right, sounds good.
Hi, this is Jeff Herman, and here's one of my biggest concerns, and I was very vocal against what was happening with the parking on Lake to 31st. And I think we all recognize right now the mistakes that were made there and how difficult it's going to be to modify that or change that now. And in my conversations with Jen Hagel as that was proceeding, one of the major things that I said to her is, what ability or flexibility are you doing with this construction to adjust for any mistakes that are made by removing parking? And the city put some time and thought into that when they did the work on Garfield and how they worked with the curb, the sloping of the curbs over there so that it would allow for some parking if needed, but there was nothing that was put into the Lake to 31st plan. And so now it's something that there's going to be a really difficult time rectifying. So I guess my question is, what type of plans do you have, flexibility do you have that's put in here in the event that the same thing happens and that you've made a mistake and you need to change things?
Well, maybe I'll just start and say, I think it's honestly too early. It's too early to say. You know, we don't know what option we're proceeding with at this point in time. And we need to understand that, to understand where there's flexibility in the layout to make future adjustments. And we just don't know that yet. You know, and we won't know that for a bit until at least we have some sort of preferred alternative that we're moving forward with. So that's how I started it. I think it's fine to think about that as we move forward, but I can't address that question right now without knowing what direction we're going with either of the layouts.
And the problem that happened last time is that you then came to us, and this was the USSD and it was the business community, and you said, here it is, this is what we're doing. And there wasn't any more conversation. You heard our concerns, you showed us some options, and then you just came back and you said, here. And by that point, it was too late, and there's nothing we could do, and we tried. But you know, again, that's my concern this time too, is you've shown us some plans. You're going to look at the comments. You're going to go back and then come up with a plan and just say, here, guys, this is what's done. And thank you for participating.
Well, I would just say that there's a different project team. I mean, none of us were involved in the design of that. First of all, it wasn't us that did that. Yes, us as the city. And I didn't track that close enough. I wasn't involved in that project whatsoever. I mean, in terms of how we move forward, again, we need to be able to evaluate thousands of comments and so much feedback, diverse stakeholder feedback. And we will be back to communicate, you know, through the various channels, whether it's through the Special Service District. Michael, I don't know if you're planning on having another meeting in June or July, similar to Lowry Hill, but we'd love to be a part of both of those meetings to give you a status update as to where we're at. But right now, we have too much work in front of us right now to start laying out the process. Jeff, I've heard your concerns. We've talked separately. You know, we've got some work and adjustments to do, and we need to pick a preferred layout before we can start addressing some of these intricacies about what sort of flexibility we have as it relates to curb space and parking and loading.
I know you've got a lot on your hands. Thank you, and I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Nicholas, you wanted to ask a question?
I guess, in your professional opinion, between Lake Street and 31st and Hennepin, what mistakes do you feel were made there? I mean, in your professional opinion, what would you have done differently there with that spot?
I mean, I think the department's position is what I would rely on right now. And the department's position is that it's not operating well, and that there's because of the operational challenges, it's not working well for any of the users, right? So you've got really wide sidewalks. You have bicycles that are in shared spaces. There's no parking or curbside loading spaces that are available, and you have very narrow travel lanes. So really the ability to make adjustments at this point is challenging. Alan, I don't know if you would want to chime in a bit on some of the other concerns that have come up as it relates to the activity block, but you know, we've publicly acknowledged, again, not necessarily my words that were quoted to me in the strib, but we've publicly acknowledged from a department perspective that we don't want to replicate the same mistake moving forward. And that is why we're putting in so much effort into having the conversations. But we also want to acknowledge that the street isn't going to be the same as it is today. And there are going to be reduced areas and for parking and loading throughout the corridor. And that is why we're taking a targeted approach to it in the best way that we can possible. So that's been our strategy. I mean, we hear you. We've heard from everyone that detests the design of that block, and believe me, that's not something that we're looking to replicate. And Alan, I'll be quiet because it looks like you're on mute.
No. Hey, I'll join in, and again, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Alan Klugman. I'm with the Traffic and Parking Services Division of Minneapolis Public Works. I've worked with a few of you, but many I've not met, so I'm pleased to meet you and chat a bit about this job. I just had a little bit to what Becca said about what we call the activity block from Lake to 31st. And I think Becca said it very well, that it's not working very well for all the modes. But I think, Nicholas, the one thing I would add to that comment, and maybe in terms of lessons learned and how we're moving forward with those lessons, is, and this might sound really basic, but I'm going to say it, is to really think about the entire life cycle of a project. And I'm not going to do the whole speech here, but our projects start with city policies and what we're trying to reach, what we're trying to meet. We move that into a design framework, we then build it. But then I think the key we're seeing with that activity block is the ongoing operations of that. And I think if we've learned one key message from that project that we're truly bringing forward to this one, is how to combine the operational aspect of a project, the long-term viability of the project, with how we meet our design policies, right? So that's the thing we're trying to sort of hit that sweet spot with the rest of the corridor. So I think, Nicholas, you kind of asked about our professional opinion. We're being very honest in saying that block's not working well, but I think we're being very sincere in saying we've learned from it, and we're really focusing on how do we not just build this, but then how do we operate it for the next 50 years? So that's kind of the thing I would say we're focusing on in terms of a lesson learned from that experience. And again, I'll just maybe add to that, and that's why we're having so much engagement listening to folks like you. Not to repeat what Becca said a few moments ago, we may not meet what every single stakeholder or individual thinks is the right balance, but we will certainly listen to and be transparent about how we take that input and apply it both to the designs and the ongoing operation.
Great. Bob,
the reason.
Oh, go ahead, Nicholas. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish it. If you don't follow up.
I guess the reason why I bring it up is, part of our responsibilities of running this district is making sure that Uptown continues to be a destination, a vibrant location, places where people want to come to. Okay, we have a lot of natural beauty and a lot of amazing businesses that have done very well over the years. Now you look out there today and things are very different. And obviously we cannot control the pandemic and the different things that we're going through as a country. But, this could affect the corridor dramatically when it comes to business owners and access and the ability for people to come here as a destination. So we have to be very, very careful with the way things are going right now with the economy and everything that's happening uptown, and boarding up and vacancies. And that's vacancies of commercial, that's vacancies of residential, that's across the board. We have to be very, very careful the decisions that we make that it could affect the really long-term growth, especially after we packed in so much density in this area. And then all of a sudden now we're in this situation where we're going to affect the businesses that brought the people here in the first place. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Jack,
Can I say something?
Mike, one moment. Jackie, I see your hand is raised, but Bob, were you going to say something right before? Did you want to add something? I thought I saw you were trying to indicate.
Yeah,
I know you can't raise your hand. So go ahead, Bob, and then Jackie, and then Mike.
Yeah, if we lose all the ability to have some parking and where people can do drop off and pick up and situations like that, it will destroy all the businesses in many of the corridors. I know our block specifically, it'll just become a ghost town. But we can't. Myself and my tenants cannot survive without parking, as well as we're a mail order business too. We need to be able to have UPS, and everybody has to have access for dropping off and picking up. Thank you very much.
Jackie, I had you next.
Sure. Thanks everybody for being here today. We appreciate your time. You probably get a little bit of our frustration. We feel like we went through these exact same conversations on the Hennepin block. We gave a lot of feedback. At the time, my company owned the project formerly known as Calhoun Square. We were adamantly opposed to everything that was being done. So we shared all of those concerns. And we are, none of us are happy to see everything we were worried about coming true. So we feel like we told you everything that was wrong, nobody cared, and it all came to fruition. We are all, I think, very concerned that the exact same thing is going to happen now. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you engaging with us. My ask to Alan and everybody else is, as you learn from the process, maybe also take away that some of the business owners and property owners know what they're talking about in a different way than maybe somebody that lives in the neighborhood and visits the corridor once a month. You know, we just have a very different perspective, and we would like some weight to be given to that perspective. Specific to the work you're planning on doing, we've already had tenants, both retail and office, ask us about the plans and the elimination of parking and what that might mean for their future businesses, and choose not to go on to Hennepin until they know what's happening. So we want you to be very cognizant that you could actually be driving businesses away from the community, which means jobs and a tax base. So those decisions aren't actually going to help any of us on this call, whether it be city workers or property owners in the area. You're negatively impacting the livelihood of that and the energy of that entire community. Specific to the plans that it looks like we are stuck with, I would advocate for option 2. I think what we have specifically learned over the last year is the businesses that were able to survive the pandemic required easy access from the customers. So that wasn't a parking ramp a block away. It was immediate pickup. So a lot of retailers and restaurants both did curbside pickup, where you needed to be within 3 or 4 parking spaces of that location to have that employee run out, drop something off in your car. So you couldn't park in the Calhoun Square parking ramp and have a restaurant do curbside pickup for you. You had to physically be at that location. The same is also true of many pickups, bite squads, those kind of delivery services. They will charge a higher fee the harder it is to pick up from that location. So anybody that cannot easily pull up to the curb, get what they need and go, that becomes more of a desert from groups that want to service that, and it just becomes harder for anybody else to support. So the more immediate access you take away, the harder it is going to be for those businesses to survive, especially I mean, none of us know what happens post-COVID, but a lot of habits were developed over the last year that probably aren't going to go away. So if you choose to eliminate access to businesses, you are in essence choosing to close those businesses. Now, maybe 15 years from now, somebody new will come in and open. I'm not denying that from a life cycle standpoint, but I think you're talking to a group of property owners and business owners that care about what happens over the next few years and care about the businesses that go out of business over the next few years because of these decisions.
Jackie, thank you. I had Mike up next, and then Jeff, your hand is raised. I didn't know if you had raised it again or not. So if you have a question, we can connect with you after Mike. Did we lose Mike Finn?
Yeah, I would just say that it looks like you're delaying the project for at least a year. And I would say this, the entire area is struggling right now. And to disrupt it before it has a chance to even come back just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think the other property owners. I think all these property owners that are on this committee are all protesting their property taxes, and they're all going to get their property taxes probably reduced. And why are they doing that? Because they've either lost their tenants, or they've had to lose, or they've had to reduce rents, or they've had to give free rents, or whatever. So besides owning a piece of property there, I also own Ragstock. And our sales so far this year are down 50%. And they were down 25% the previous year. So the area needs a lot of nurturing, a lot of help from the city, a lot more policemen in the area, a lot more things for it to get back on its feet. My proposal would be just to delay the project until the area gets back on its feet. You don't see for lease signs. The buildings are full. The restaurants come back. There's more retailers involved in the area. And that would be my recommendation, that you just put a hold on the entire project. I mean, it would be like, another, let's say a company is wanting to expand and the area all of a sudden has gone downhill. Why would they expand in that area? So my feelings would be just to delay the entire project.
Becca, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to the timing and the funding piece, or.
Sure. Thanks for your comments, Mike, on that. Yes, that is something that we've heard is, an overall desire to postpone the project. And we've done the best that we can based on where we're getting funding for this project to, again, push off construction and utility construction along the corridor. And we have continued to hear the feedback about layout approval happening in August before elections for city council, and what sort of adjustments can we make. And we are evaluating that in terms of postponing the entire project, just based on the way that this project is being funded, with nearly 20 to 30% of the overall project costs being attributed to the feds. So that's basically offsetting local costs. It's costs that we don't have to bring to the table from a local or a city entity. There has not been discussions to postpone the overall project. There's a need to reconstruct the utilities under the street. There's a need for the street to be reconstructed, and we're doing the best that we can to find as much give as we can in the schedule, while still allowing that federal funding to contribute to the cost of the project. And we totally understand how sensitive this is, and we're working as hard as we can to make adjustments, but yet not lose that money. But your point is taken. The timing on this is not good.
Listen, I don't know how it works, but there's always federal funding. Come on, get realistic. Always federal funding.
Jeff and then Nick.
Thank you. My question is this: in the studies that you guys have done with those two plans that you've presented, can you identify for us where you now see customers parking in the area? Because I'm assuming now that they're going to go into the neighboring adjacent streets, and the same with employee parking, where that's going to go. And part of the concern here too is that if you look at Uptown, there's now parking restrictions and requirements on adjacent streets that now prohibit customers or employees parking in those areas. And I could see that very well happening in the neighborhoods adjacent to Hennepin Avenue, certainly when you guys implement what you're going to do. So what have you done right now in terms of identifying where customers will now park and employees will park now that they can't do it on Hennepin?
Jeanette or Alan, why don't you start?
I can maybe start. So a couple things. One would be, as we are looking at overall parking, I know there were some references to the proximity of parking, and just want to acknowledge there are something like 2,000 surface parking spaces along the corridor. And so some businesses clearly have already a surface parking lot with obviously dedicated parking for their business. And so in terms of trying to prioritize space in the right of way, that's a location that would likely not be a priority for providing parking on the street where there is that dedicated surface lot. As we looked at the corridor based on where there was space and the parking study that was done in 2018, we had some idea of where the parking is most utilized. So some spaces in the corridor are very lightly used and some are very heavily used. And so every parking space isn't isn't the same. It doesn't have the same needs or the same use. And so as we did put in those pockets of parking and loading, we were focusing on parts of blocks that did not have dedicated off-street parking, and maybe didn't have as many other options for customers or employees.
Jeff, maybe I can jump in here too. You asked a very specific question that I'm going to say I don't believe we have an answer to for you now. You asked about customer and employee parking. We have very, very, very good statistics, as Jeanette said, about the amount of parking supply in the corridor, both off-street, on-street. We have very good statistics about how the parking is used. We did several measurements at different times of day, in different days of the week, up and down the corridor, even on the side streets, east and west of Hennepin. So I just want to be honest with you. I think we have very good aggregate data on the amount of parking that's occurring. We may not have the fine detail that you're speaking to in terms of where customer parks, where employee parks, but I kind of want to build off that point. And I mean, one of the themes we're making today, and look, we've been really honest with you, is Hennepin's going to change. The future is going to be different than today. And I kind of talked about life cycle and operations and how all this fits together. I think one of the things we need to work with folks like you on is, what are some of those changes and how do we all work together to make this successful? So for example, you referenced employee parking. That's probably going to be different in the future than it is today. Or I'll say it might be different, that if an employee is parking on Hennepin and, staying there for their entire shift, that may not be a feasible or, let's say, a wise decision. But from an operational point of view, that's the sort of thing we'd expect to work with the business owners, the property owners, to make sure their employees understand how this road needs to function, where the viability of that parking is, and where they really need to be. So I think there's going to be differences in the future, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Nicholas, I have you up next.
So, I mean, I understand the deadlines and everything that you're working with, and I appreciate you being on this call, because I know this is obviously a very difficult thing to do to the design to try to keep everybody happy, because that's never going to happen no matter what we all do. But I think it's really, really imperative that the conversation about holding back this project, so we can all make better decisions, communicate with one another to trying to find a viable option, I think is the best way moving forward. Because coming up, looming with an August date of deadline being acceptance, I don't think there's been enough feedback from the community about how to best do this corridor, in my opinion, at all. And I've been a 30-year resident, property owner, business owner for this area, and now is probably the most concerning time that I've ever had of being a property owner. I've never doubted my investment in Uptown, ever, okay? But from things that are happening, and a massive project like this can affect everything, coming from a downtown which is basically vacant, the ghost town. We can't let that affect us here in Uptown. And I guess that's the biggest concern we have, is I think we need some more feedback. We need some more research to make sure we're making the right decision, because spending 20 to 30% of federal money now, will probably spend twice as much down the road if we make the mistake here. And that's the biggest concern that I have. Thank you.
Are there other questions, comments? Jeff?
I just, what I want to know, Alan, and from the city's team also, is, can you show us a precedent or an area that's being, that you're modeling this after? So many times we've heard Portland or Seattle or San Francisco, and when they were designing, and I just keep pointing to this, and it's not to be, it just is what it is. I said the same thing from Lake to 31st. Just show us where this is working, and then we can understand it a little bit better. Or is the city of Minneapolis trying to be pioneering and trying to do something to show the entire country, hey, we've done this and it's being done in the Netherlands, and look, we're implementing it here in Minneapolis. So, Alan, have you or your team looked at another city in the country or somewhere else that you can point to and say, hey, we're doing it like them and it's working great there? That's my
Yeah, you
question.
bet. Yeah, no, good question. Let me start with some general comments and we'll try to get more specific. I kind of like how you phrased it. Are we trying to be pioneering? Not really. We are in contact with other cities. We have a pretty good peer network nationwide that frankly, we're in a lot of communication with in terms of projects like this that are similar in terms of how a corridor's kind of been transformed. So I probably don't have them on the top of my head right now to give you some examples, but that's something we can look to and maybe come back. But I think it goes a little bit broader, if I may say that. And I know you've heard these comments before, but I think they bear repeating. We're building one road today, we're designing one road today, but it really fits in with the city vision, a city set of policies that, let's be honest, we've been working on that for several years, and we have council endorsement of what those policies are. And so we're trying to kind of hit the sweet spot where, we're absolutely listening to folks like you. We want to respond to what you're saying, but we're also designing to very important policies that are guiding our city, not just for today, but for the next, decades. And informing those policies are the questions you're asking in terms of what have other cities done, what have other corridors look like. So, I think we're looking to change Hennepin. We've said that several times today and in the past. It's not going to look like what it's looked in the past, but we're not looking to do something pioneering in the sense that, it would change the road from being viable to not being viable. So, we do have precedents from other cities. We can look back on some of that research and share with you. But, we don't want to give a message here that we think we're doing something that's so far reaching that it's not achievable, right? We're trying to build something that's going to work for this community and for this corridor.
Any other questions or comments?
Bob Sorensen here.
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
I've been a tenant and a property owner in Uptown for 30 years, and I've seen the changes in parking. When you're talking about 2018 traffic and parking studies, those are kind of obsolete now. There's been thousands of new apartments built, and there is not the parking off street even that there was 2 and 3 years ago. Those spaces are always full all the time. And on our block and behind me, there's approximately 250 new units going in, but they're not going to be providing any parking for any of the visitors to these tenants. In fact, these units don't have adequate parking for all their tenants. So there needs to be places for the businesses that will be in the area for a long time, if possible, for drop off and pick up and limited parking for those businesses. They're only building these apartments because this is considered a popular area for entertainment and shopping. Thank you very much.
Hey, Bob, this is Alan. If I could just jump in. You referenced 250 units being built behind where you are. Can you just tell me where you are?
Pardon? Where we're at? I own the building at 2829 to 31 Hennepin Avenue South on the east side of the street.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie, I have you next.
Thanks, Michael. Bob, I think that's a great point. I can say, in addition to commercial, we also do residential properties. And what I can tell you over the last year is one thing that's dramatically changed with our residential buildings is the amount of parking during the day because people no longer go to work. So previously, maybe in 2018, there was a lot of street access during the day where employees and or customers could have parked, and now residents are staying in those spaces. And we don't know, I don't think any of us know how long that might last for and what that sort of work from home policy might be in the future. So to Bob's point about that data being outdated, I don't know that it also takes into account the new way the world is living right now as well. And I would say, Jeff brought it up earlier, we have seen in many cases as neighborhoods develop and you need, or you're pushing the employees and the customers into the neighborhoods, those neighborhoods then vote to have permit parking on their streets because there's no place for them to park in the evenings. So it would also be nice if the city were relying on that parking for access for the businesses, that you also then, as a part of this project, eliminate the possibility of those streets ever becoming private parking or resident only parking, so that that parking is really guaranteed to remain with the commercial corridor long term.
Nick, I see your hand up. Did you have another comment or is that up from before?
That's from before, sorry.
Oh, okay, very good. Well, we've got a few minutes left here before our hour is up. Are there any final comments, questions?
I've just got one quick one to piggyback
Please.
on what you said. The so as I look at the options, there's some kind of crosshatched areas of parking that are not on Hennepin, and at least in the legend here, it says existing parking loading under evaluation. So what's the timing? That seems to me to mean that potentially might go away, or the city's looking at what to do with that space as well. Is there a time frame on that? Because that's quite a bit of the sort of, you know, offshoot parking that everybody's talking about here.
Yeah, the intent of the hatching was not to suggest that it would go away. It was to acknowledge that in some cases that management of that parking is part of the solution. So south of 28th, I believe most of that is metered. Some of it has some time of day restrictions. You know, we, not maybe specifically to this portion, but we certainly have talked about strategies that could include things like designated loading zones that are near the corner, or other management to make spaces available, particularly for some of those short-term needs. And just recognizing that that's part of the overall strategy of managing parking.
And so from this point forward, I mean, what's the process of picking one of these options versus the other?
I feel like.
Or a third option coming in.
Sure. I mean, you know, whatever option is the recommended option that moves forward obviously needs to consider the feedback that we've received, and it's going to take us some time to process the comments. You know, again, you know, over 3,000 comments or around 3,000 comments is a lot of feedback. You know, some of it is more detailed than others, and we really just need to kind of sift and sort through that. You know, and at the same time, we're having conversations about what sort of adjustments we can make to the timeline as it relates to layout approval. Again, you know, we've heard this comment from most of the stakeholder groups that we've met with throughout this public engagement period. So next steps, we're evaluating feedback. We'll make some recommendations in terms of what sort of adjustments we think are appropriate based on that feedback. And then we'll be back to see you again. So we will be back if there's time for us in June or July to kind of talk about what we've done since this point. And so we hope to be able to share an update with you and all the other stakeholder groups around the same time in the next couple of months.
Okay.
Becca, is it envisioned that there would be another sort of round of community forums as well once there is a sort of a more, I'll just say refined in a broad sense? Is that the intent?
Yes.
Okay. I don't see anybody's hand raised. Well, I guess we can conclude here. So we are, as we get closer to June, so we will have a meeting in June. That will be in addition to the project update from the project team. That will be a longer meeting because we'll do sort of our normal course of activities, reviewing last year's, current year budget, as well as adopting a budget recommendation for 2022. So that will all happen at our next meeting. Right now, we're envisioning that's going to be sometime in June, though we haven't confirmed a date. When we have a date that we're targeting, we will, as we have done historically, we will canvass the board for availability, and hopefully, presuming it works for a majority of the board members, that's the date we would go with. So again, as we get a little closer to June, we'll be reaching back out to folks and confirm that date. With that, if there are no final comments, we can adjourn, and I will thank Becca, Jonette, and Alan for joining us today to walk through this again and providing this update. And it sounds like there's more to come.
Thanks much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Very
Bye-bye.
good. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. See you in June.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.